I've enjoyed the journey. I've enjoyed the growth. I'm always
Mm.
challenged, but I think the most important thing for me is that I know why I want to do this.
Welcome back, everybody. Bruce B. Baker, founder of Collective Responsibility, here today with another episode of the Sustainable Ambassador Podcast. In this episode, I'm incredibly honored to have Curtis Baker, Head of Inclusion, Diversity, and Equity for the Asia-Pacific region at Dow. Join us today to speak about the work he's been doing, the recent rise of diversity and inclusion in the workspace, some of the recent cases of public backlash, but more than anything, just the challenge that he faced, the opportunity he sees to develop and deploy equity programs at scale through an organization. Curtis, thank you very much for taking the time to join us today. As a starting point, would you mind introducing yourself and a little bit of the work that you're doing over there?
So my name is Curtis. As you mentioned, the Regional Inclusion, Diversity, Equity lead here in Asia Pacific, based in Shanghai. Moved to China about 10 years ago with the Walt Disney Company. Started my DEI journey in the Walt Disney Company here in China. Moved to Shanghai Disney Resort, leading DEI full time there, and then moved to Dow about 2.5 years ago to lead ID&E.
So what does the head of IDE do?
For Dow, it's overseeing 12 different countries or markets in Asia Pacific. And it's really setting that strategy, that hand-holding, that mentoring, that sponsorship for our senior leaderships, for Asia Pacific leadership team, and then our country leadership team. And that's part of that governance. But then also with our employee resource groups or our ERGs. We have regional ERGs, and then we have local IND focal points that I work with in every country or even at every site. So that's internal. And then it's also connecting our pillars outside, building our reputation, that recognition, but also connecting with the community. Because if we just silo think only inside, we're not going to
Yeah.
go anywhere. And then it's also taking that global strategy and being the bridge. A lot of people say, it's taking global and coming local, but it's actually a bridge. It's both ways in
Yeah.
that, because it's not only what is global doing, but also we're telling what the region, what is Asia doing that can help to impact global or help to impact some of our EMEA colleagues as well.
How do you progress in this region? What are the issues that are important? And what are the things that you're doing on kind of a day-to-day basis that really are engaging your teams?
I think overall in all of the countries, your gender is still something hot in this market. Two, it's also something that we can talk about. There's no sensitivity around that as far as like from a legal point of view or from a political point of view. And I think another interesting one that we're seeing in Asia a lot as well is around disability. In 4 countries we work within, there are quotas from the government of saying you need to hire a certain percentage of your overall total workforce to be employment to have employee disabilities. Probably say then the last one is around LGBTQ. In the region, there's some countries that are very advancing and moving forward, even baby steps, and there's some countries that are moving backwards in the region. And so it's where do you find, that balance? You look at, family planning, you look at family benefits, equitable benefits. So I think those are some of the high notes there right now. And we're going to continue in the next couple of years.
What do you think the role of corporates is then? Like, are you supposed to be an advocate and show how there's a business case to get it done? Are you supposed to just do it quietly, like it's part of your values? You're not really out there promoting anything, but you're just making sure that there's safety for those groups. Like, what do you view as the role and responsibility of corporations in that context?
There's enough data from various resources that shows that employees that feel like their sense of belonging and that they're valued and respected, they have a 40% higher productivity rate. That also increases 14% and a higher on the financial side of that. But also when you're looking for new talents, those who feel like they have that inclusive and sense of belonging will be able to refer others and the people in their sphere of influence. And so that's why I find it's important for companies that, because we invest a lot of money before someone even on boards. And so then when someone leaves the company because they don't feel they're included, they don't feel like they're valued, they don't feel like they can provide for their family, however they define their family. And so that's the business case around, and it's just good business. I think it's just good business.
I want to push back a little bit.
Yeah.
And this is just say, like in regions where they're not open, or maybe they are going backwards for, say, religious reasons, and you're developing a culture that is inclusive, you're advertising maybe in the market that, hey, if you are, LGBTQ plus, you can come here, we have a safe work environment. How do you balance that? Because this is where kind of like the two rivers are meeting. There's a little bit of a clash, and you have to work that out.
And so there are countries in our region that we don't promote our GLAD or LGBTQ ERG, not because we're afraid of because we're hiding in that, because we don't want to put those who may identify in that category in those countries. We don't want to put them at risk. So I think that's one of the unique challenges and sometimes the
Yeah.
difficult parts about you being in a region like this. I mean, you can't take a regional approach to everything. There's no cookie cutter. And so you just
Mm.
have to be mindful of where you work.
How do you make sure that you have the right strategy?
The key, I think, to being successful in this role, whether you're in Dow or any other company, is the relationships you have on the ground. I can't be
Right.
everywhere at every time and be an expert in that. And so that's where it goes back to our values. We call it TTEA: trust, transparency, empowerment, and accountability. And so I really rely on that trust with my local I&D focal points.
What do you think of the skills or tool sets that are core to you doing your work? You've mentioned communication. I've heard a little bit of policy, obviously creating good structure and programming and strategy. Like, what are the things that you think are core to your ability to do a great job?
It's building trust with people. You're dealing
Mhm.
with sensitive issues, from an ID&E perspective. You're dealing with people's identities that they may or may not be visible with.
Mhm.
But then also you're opening doors and creating equity. And so you're actually helping those individuals. And if you don't have that trust, you also won't know where those gaps are. And I also think that influencing skills is so important because you
Mm.
need to be able to, from the CEO to the country leader to the commercial directors, you need to be able to have that conversation and help them to understand the value. I think lastly is just resilience, because again, the work is hard, the work is tough, but the impact is fantastic.
What is the impact that you're having? Like, how do you measure your success?
So for us, we measure gender representation from all levels.
Mhm.
And we set that as a KPI because we want to grow, especially in our industry. We're science materials, you're manufacturing.
Yeah.
Typically, you're looking at mainly only 27% of your base would be females. Within Dow, we're almost at 40% in Asia. We also measure leadership, women in leadership. Again, if we're talking about STEM, we're still seeing, we're not seeing that
Mm.
balance. Another fun thing that we also measure is we measure our ERG participation. So how many of our employees are engaged in the ERG? And why do we do that? Because we see the data that even
Okay.
last year's 13 points higher if an individual is engaged in the ERG, they have a 13-point higher employee experience.
Okay, a bit insensitive question here. When I was talking with Alex Edmonds over at LBS, we talked about his research and finding that, like, look, representation for representation's sake doesn't actually benefit the business. How do you look at that differently and say, no, actually does bring more value?
I look at it two ways.
Mm.
First, one of my favorite quotes: culture eats strategy for breakfast. I see it happen every day. You look at,
Yeah.
when things get tough, when companies are going through restructure or through reorg, like we
Mhm.
have, the culture really does eat the strategy. It really does dictate, and it
Yeah.
carries a company through the hard times.
Yeah.
I think measuring too, it's not always measuring ethnicity. It's not always measuring gender. It's sometimes also measuring, and I think this is something we see in China, that not everyone, if everyone comes from one university, they're taught by the same professors. They're taught the
Mhm.
same school of thinking. But if we
Yeah.
start to bring other people in the innovation hub, let's say our research and development, if everyone's only
Mm.
coming from one university, they're going to have
Yeah.
that certain mindset. But if we bring somebody from La Trobe University, we bring someone from Singapore University, or from Seoul
Right.
University,
Right.
and
Right.
from you know Jiao Tong University, they have different lived experiences in their education, but they also have that lived experiences, and so they think of things differently. There's a great example of a car company here in China that the lead designer is a female.
Mhm.
She's the first female in the head and design for all of Asia. And when she came in, they were doing airbags testing. And so they
Mm.
did tall people, they did short people, they did skinny people, they did bigger folks. And she goes, "So where's the pregnant women?"
Mm.
And they go, "We've never done that before." She goes, "Do you not think that women who are pregnant drive cars?" And
Mm.
so, you wouldn't, you and I may not be thinking about that, but for her, it's
Yeah.
just like that was just like a natural inclination.
Right.
And so
Right. Right.
that helps to show, that when they're able to bring that into design, how
Yeah.
they're able to drive that. And so, I think that's one way that you can measure that, because it's not always
Yeah.
just the numbers or profitability, but that does impact the profitability, and the innovation.
Maybe sometimes we measure the wrong things, just not realizing where we got it wrong. Like,
And I think that's one of the interesting perspectives with DEI is that there's no cookie cutter because
yeah,
you have to look at by industry, you have to look at by region, you have to look at it by, so I think that's one of the exciting things about it. But
yeah.
that also on the flip side is one of the challenging things about it.
How did you get into this to begin with? Like, what was your career path before DIE, DEI, before you get into the alphabet soup? And is this a career, or is this part of your career or an enhancement of your career?
I was working at the Walt Disney Company in the corporate office here in Shanghai, and it was around Pride.
Mm,
And I heard about some stuff going on locally, and I was like, "What is Disney doing?" I thought, well, maybe I should ask the CSR, the corporate social responsibility person. Simple email, hit send. Like 2.5 hours later, our senior vice president of HR pings me and catches my eyes and say, "I saw your email. Do you have a minute?" I went to his office and he said, "Chris, I really appreciate your email because I never even thought about it and I don't know what to do." He goes, "Embarrassingly, I don't know what to do." He goes, "So
mm,
I'm committed to let's do it together." But that started us launching Disney Pride, the first ERG in all of Asia. And I think it morphed into being 10% of my role. And then my director's like, "You're actually doing a lot." Then again, 20% of my role so we could validate it. And I
mm,
had in my goals that I would be doing DEI full time. I wanted to cover Asia Pacific in like 5 to 10 years.
mm.
That was my goal. And
Okay.
I would say I made that within 4 years. So I was
And they created that role for you, or you were in the role doing 10, 20%, you showed the passion, and then when that person left, you took their job.
very, very lucky that they actually formed the role for me. I've really enjoyed the journey. I've enjoyed the growth. I'm always
Mm,
challenged. But I think the most important thing for me is that I know why I want to do this. Is it a career?
mm,
Yeah, and I think it's one that's growing. I think you're going to constantly see an evolution as well.
yeah,
I think because especially with ESG
yeah,
coming in Asia, you're starting to see more sustainability and inclusion coming together. Now, I'll say I don't have a crystal ball. I'm not an expert, and I don't believe in experts in DEI.
yeah,
But I think you're going to see that consistent, that ESG, those in sustainability, working very closely with those who are leading inclusion. I mean, for me,
yeah,
one of my closest partners is our sustainability expert, and we
sure,
look at it because what we're doing is we're bringing value to the business.
yeah,
And so, in that way, I do see it as a career, but then I see may continue to morph and look different than it looked 5 years ago. Then it's in
right.
5 years, in 10 years, it's going to look different. Um,
So, what do you think the key differences will be, and how are you preparing yourself to be ahead of that change?
So that
Hmm.
ESG reporting, United Nations standards, GRI, the Global Reporting Index, all of those are driving companies to do more. I see that
Sure,
driving more
sure,
work in the markets in the future. I think you will still continuously to see more and more DEI professionals not in setting in HR,
hmm,
so that they almost remain a little less. Part of that HR space, but where they become a little bit more independent so that they can be more collaborative. And I think that's
okay,
very intentional.
hmm,
You're seeing a little bit of that, but in Asia, you're starting to see is just with a recruiter friend of mine, executive recruiter with my friend of mine from Singapore, and she said they're starting to see sustainability and inclusion as one role, and it's more of a
hmm.
strategy role rather than having all the practical tacticals. You just have that strategic look and then trickle down. I mean,
How do you maintain your passion, or how much of an advocate can you be in the corporate role to get things done? I mean, LGBTQ plus, I know, is not necessarily ubiquitously accepted. You're really trying to drive it, but you're getting no, 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 no. How do you maintain your passion and your drive for it?
some days you feel like you're not going to get through it, to be honest. It's challenging work. And I think it goes back to, knowing your why. For
Mm,
me, I know what it means to be excluded.
mm,
I know what it means to not belong. I know what it means to be in a conversation, to be in a meeting room and not know anything that's going on because I don't speak that language fluently. You
hmm,
know, so that is part of my why, because the flip side is that I know what it means to be included. I know that
hmm,
feeling in Chinese, that gui shugan, that sense of belonging. I know
hmm.
what that means, and I know that it takes intentional actions to get that there. And so
Yeah,
for me, seeing that for not only myself, but seeing that for other people. um, but it's not, when we ask about, well, how do you measure? sometimes it's not the data or the numbers, but
Mhm.
it's the story that someone says, "Hey, can we have a quick coffee? Can we go outside? Hey, I
Yeah.
need to tell you, I am fill in a blank." And they reveal a part of them that's very private. It's
Mhm.
because you built that trust. Or they say, I'm having a really hard time with mental health right now. I'm really struggling with depression because
Mhm.
of the inclusion work around Are You Okay Day or around mental well-being. I was able to take some time off with my family because of the
Yeah.
policies that the I&D team did. Those stories of impacts are what's going to keep people, you know, really engaged as an employee, but then also they're going to tell their peers, they're going to tell their sphere of influence. And that's going
Yeah.
to build that reputation, that's going to build that community and the recognition. And that's what keeps me going. I think it's those stories of impact.
If you were speaking to a student or young professional who wanted to kind of take the same steps you did, develop their career in your footsteps, what advice would you give them to get started?
I think you have to know your why because it is challenging. It can be very challenging. I mean, even in sustainability, you're trying to tell people why they need to be investing into something that they can't necessarily see or
Hmm.
touch for now. It's about long-term investment. And
Yep.
so when you know your why, then that helps you in those days that you get 100 no's or a week of no's, that you
Mm.
still know that you persist and you just look at it differently. So I think that's the most important thing is knowing your why, because then that keeps you grounded and rooted when it gets
Mm.
hard. And also be curious. Be curious, ask questions, but then don't just ask other questions. Also be able to start getting in that time of when you're looking at your own self, looking at LinkedIn, looking at websites, looking at other countries, looking at things outside of I started
Hmm.
reading articles around electrical vehicles and all this stuff that has nothing to do with inclusion, you
Yeah.
would think, but it keeps me looking at what else is going on in the market, and that,
Mm.
with we need diverse perspectives. We need, people in the innovation labs and research and development. So, so
Yeah.
you're looking at all that. So I think being curious and then start doing it. Just simply start doing it. And that's how
Mhm.
I started. I didn't know that DEI was a career or was a path.
Yeah.
I just
Yeah.
started doing it because I benefited personally, but also other people benefiting from that. Um,
Mm.
and if it feels right, sign up if your company has an ERG, get that way. And if not in your company, look into the community, because
Yeah.
then again, you're getting diverse perspectives from other companies, from other lived experiences. So you have to be active and you have to be engaged.